Hello to our listeners out there. You might be tuning in from the Ivy podcast or the Workforce Agility podcast, wherever you are tuning in from. Thank you so much for joining us. I am your host, Angela Alberti. If you've had a chance to listen to my podcast before, you know that a lot of what I speak on and the people that I interview with are mainly aligned towards this very interesting world of talent, talent delivery, and human capital management and oversight. That's exactly the premise behind today's episode. I have the awesome opportunity to sit down and speak with Jeff Kortes. He is the founder of Human Asset Management and an awesome speaker, goes to many different engagements around the country. Thank you so much for sitting with us and chatting, Jeff. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us the intro.
Well, thank you for letting me on. And I spent 25 years in human resources before I started my own consulting firm. And when I started my firm 12 years ago, I started as a headhunter, and I still headhunt to this day. What happened is that evolved because I found out that from my HR career, I knew a lot about employee retention. But then I found, as I worked more and more as a headhunter, I realized I really knew why people stayed and why people left. And as I tell people, who better to talk to you about employee retention than someone who steals talent for a living, which is what I do. So, and that's how I got into what I'm doing right now.
That's awesome. And I think that is very critical, especially in today's, I think the world of talent and how it's evolving so rapidly around us. Maybe some of that has been onset a little bit by the pandemic, but you are very true. So a level of expertise that's brought to you through your headhunting. But I'm curious to know, what was that moment in your career when you were like, you know what, I need out of HR. I'm going to make the decision to go out on my own. What was exactly that prompted that?
Well, I had been thinking about it. And then the organization I was with, we got involved with a hostile takeover, and we got bought. And I was thinking about it, and the decision was made for me because at 11:40, we got bought on a Tuesday, and at 11:45 on Friday, they fired me. And then at noon, they fired my boss, who was the president of the company. And probably the best thing that ever happened.
Wow. So it's the kind of the classic case of the acquisition and the takeover, but the benefit behind that is that you got to go out on your own and relive this life as an entrepreneur. What were your initial thoughts in the game of headhunting? I mean, I'm sure you had a level of that, through your own experience being in HR for 25 years, but what was that experience like now out on your own?
Yeah, and what helped me was as an HR leader, I'd done a lot of recruiting, and I'd been a talent acquisition manager for a large organization at one point in my career. And what got me out on my own is I was not impressed with a lot of the headhunters that I had to work with over the years. And I said, well, I can do a better, higher touch, much more, I'll say, people-centric as opposed to transactional.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of what you guys do, and I'm sure a lot of what you do is, especially with during your speaking engagements, I mean, you're a retainment expert. What were some of those things that you were catching on whenever you were actually headhunting and having the opportunity to sit with people and understand why they were leaving a job? Any tips that you could share with the audience?
I would say you want to listen when you ask the question, well, why would we be considering making a move? And then listen what they have to say. I rephrase it a little bit differently. And then I always ask a candidate, what would you change about your current job to make it ideal?
Mm-hmm.
And you get better answers that way, because oftentimes people are reluctant because they're smart and they don't want to burn bridges. So they don't necessarily want to be totally upfront because it may make their organization sound bad. So when I phrase it about what would you do to make it better or to make it an ideal position, then you get constructive response and real feedback.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It totally changes the tonality of the conversation. Now, you've had a chance to speak with many different people on the topic. What do you think are those consistent forms of feedback that you get on why a person is actually leaving? Any themes that you would say, hey, these are my top three takeaways after all of the people and all of the candidates that I speak to. I know that this is one of the reasons that would make their job more ideal.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing and everybody talks about the boss. Boss is critical,
Yeah.
but organizational culture is critical as well. And what I would lump it under, I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later. I put it under my crap: caring, respect, appreciation, and praise,
Yeah.
because that covers many of the things. Why people want to leave. Does the organization care about people? Do they respect them, or do they do things to disrespect them? And then the
Mhm.
appreciation and praise piece, because uh, young people in particular want that and won't stick around if they're not being appreciated and getting praise.
That's fantastic. I think you've hit on something on so many different layers. The retention oftentimes is routed to crap. This acronym, by the way, which I may utilize, but I will definitely source you, Jeff, because that's an awesome takeaway for me. But let's dive into that a little bit more, particularly from culture. A lot of what you direct and help with clients is consulting them on what a top retainment strategy is. How does that employee engagement and culture building really tie into that? And any tips that you would give or advice on how to have that resonate throughout every presence in their culture, company structure?
Well, I think you have to have a people-centric culture in this day and age.
Yeah.
In the past, I'm a baby boomer, and you could get away with not having an optimal culture. I was fortunate that I worked with some people back in the 80s that talked about culture, and they were one guy in particular was a guru. I mean, he talked about culture when no one was talking about culture. So I
Wow.
learned that, and I was able to work that over the course of my HR career. And because if you have a people-centric culture and you take care of your people are going to take care of the customer. Because if they feel like you care about them, they'll take care of the customer.
Mhm, mhm. And how do you think that that can be done at like the corporate conglomerates that are just thousands and thousands of workers, the Amazons of the world? Is that even realistic?
It is. It is. Is it easy? No, it's not. But one of the advantages is that the Amazons and some larger organizations have is they've got more resources
Yeah.
than the small and mid-sized organizations. So, what it really comes down to is setting the tone and setting the expectation that these are the certain values and behaviors that we expect from our people, and this is the way we expect our leaders to behave, because that's where it really starts. If your leaders have a value system that's inconsistent with the value system of the organization from a standpoint of how you're going to treat the customer, how you're going to treat each other, all those things, as soon as there's that disconnect, things go awry, and it just starts to go in a downward spiral is what I see. It's
Right.
tougher. It's a lot tougher, but uh, the ability to even use technology with a larger organization, in addition to that one-on-one contact and things, technology, if harnessed right, can actually help that process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. And then to put it simply, they've got a lot more money to be able to invest into this type of structure and this type of
Yeah.
continuity, right? So that's definitely a good point. But let's go back then to crap, right?
Okay.
Uh, caring, respect, appreciation, praise, crap, and the employees that need this, particularly the younger generations. Can you give a little bit of a reasoning or any sort of attributes that have led you to believe that what is the millennials and the Gen Zs of the world really need this sort of environment to thrive?
Well, and it's not only anecdotal and from observation on my part, but the other thing is the statistic. One that I quote all the time is that the millennial 76% of millennials said they would think about quitting their job if they didn't feel appreciated. And
Wow.
because of the fact, and you alluded to it very early on, and because of the fact by 2025, 75% of our workforce is going to be made up of people younger than 37. So essentially, it's going to be the millennials, the Gen Zs, because baby boomers like myself, they're retiring in droves, and that was
Mhm.
accelerated by the pandemic. Uh, Although it was coming, it was heading towards us like a freight train. Uh, Back in 2009, I was talking about this stuff in 2009, and people told me I was crazy. But all you had to do was look at the demographics. We didn't have enough baby boomers, didn't have enough kids.
Mhm.
And then through the way baby boomers raised their kids, appreciation and praise became more and more important.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and yeah, we talk about the helicopter parent and the lawnmower parent,
And
where they
everyone gets a trophy parent.
everybody gets a trophy and all those things. And one of the things that I work with clients on is how do you still do those things, but wean a lot of younger people off who have an unrealistic expectation about
Yeah.
appreciation and praise.
Yeah.
And it it's challenging. It is really challenging, and it's frustrating for leaders. And it's not just frustrating for uh, older leaders that are Gen Xers or baby boomers, but I know a lot of millennial leaders because they're moving into those roles. They could be 36, 37, and they're frustrated by their colleagues.
Mhm.
It's just amazing. And it's how do you do it right, but not overdo it.
Oh yeah, and put priority around it because, like you mentioned, this is here. It's now a big part of the workforce. Curious to know because I have so many questions on your thoughts on this that have just come up with our own organic conversation. But we have what could be 5 different generations in one office setting or even a virtual setting.
Right.
How do you maintain the culture that, number one, drives through different generational impacts, and number two, it could be completely conducted online? I mean, in some cases, I'm a co-founder of My Base Pay. We only have the chance to see each other maybe a few times a quarter. So how do you really establish that with a remote setting? I know that's a
Yeah.
question in different areas, but I'm just
Yeah.
fascinated by what you're telling me today.
It's a lot of hard work because I've had organizations I've worked with say, well, most of our people are virtual or a hybrid of some sort. And then they say, well, uh, we don't get together, like you said, like only maybe like once a quarter. Well, a
Yeah.
leader in an organization, when that happens, is they have to make it a point to do the same things that they would do in person, but do them virtually. And that is more, it's harder work. I mean, when you're in a physical office or in a factory setting or whatever it is, or a construction site, you see the people, and as you're walking on the construction site, you can say hi and ask how their weekend's been, and chit chat with them and those sort of things. Well,
It's a
now
coffee
the
talk,
week,
right? Let's get to
yeah,
know each other over coffee in the morning, right?
yeah, absolutely. And well, so now what leaders have to do is they have to pick up the phone and they have to call. If they've got 5 people on their team, call every one of them, like on Monday morning. Hey, I just want to give you a call. Let's talk about what we've got going for the upcoming week, and let's and how was your weekend? And get to know your people, and again, know about their family,
Mhm.
their spouse, their partner, whatever it is. And so, say for instance, I use the example because my sons both wrestle. You know, if the son is a wrestler and he had a tournament on Saturday, that's the first thing you should ask. Hey, how'd your
Yeah.
son do in the wrestling tournament? And that's how people open up and you get to know people. But it's harder because you have to make separate touches, as opposed to when you're in a setting, it's much easier to do those touches.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
I love the fact that you mentioned just pick up the phone, right? No need to schedule a Zoom. We don't
right.
have to be on camera. Everyone's exhausted from Zoom. Just get to know your people through organic conversation. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
and just pick up the phone, and it might not have to be any particular time. Uh, you can do spontaneous calls. I know that might sound crazy to some people because we are so used to scheduling these Zoom calls. Uh,
Mhm.
and for what it's worth, I don't You're right. People are sick of Zoom for some reason, and it's okay when they get a phone call.
Yeah.
That's what I see. And the other thing is I talked about harnessing technology. How do you get information out to a group? And actually, that's led to another venture that I'm working on, developing an app. You had talked about engagement.
Yeah.
It's designed to drive engagement and retention using technology. And it's so you can push communication out to your people. They can respond anonymously. A lot of those features so that you can hear what your people are thinking. And then you can listen, and then you can say, well, we've got to do some things differently here. And then you do some things differently. And then you can ask them again, hey, we've made some changes. Is this working? It's the same thing as when you used to do engagement study, like big engagement studies every 2 years, right? And then most organizations never follow up on it for what it's worth.
Yeah.
And people get angry. Well, this is designed to be quicker, faster. And because we saw, myself and my business partner, we saw a need to use technology differently to support all those in-person things. And that's where I really see the whole engagement and retention going. A hybrid model used to be everything was in person, right, before the pandemic. Well, on the other hand, if you do the hybrid, we're finding that works pretty well. I mean, your team, for example, you meet quarterly or whatever that is, but in the meantime, how do you stay in touch with each other?
Yeah.
And that's where we see technology and in-person a necessary blend.
Well, and it's also the most important and critical part of that is validating the data by actually applying metrics on what you're pulling. I mean, that's the biggest part of the equation. How many times have you, as an employee, in my own personal situation, you've been given a package so that I can answer some questions on how I feel about my job, the performance, the culture, and then give honest feedback through that, but didn't see any of it actually applied or taken into consideration. And that's where I think is the biggest missing link behind this. So very exciting stuff that you guys are developing through that. And I've got to ask you this. I really want to get your thoughts behind this, because you know this. Anyone that is in human capital or talent knows about, I'm going to say it, the boogeyman, right? The Great Resignation, right?
Yeah.
We have loads of people resigning, leaving their job consistently. What has been the last several months, 3.5%, 3%, maybe 4% of the workforce population just resigning. What do you think about that in general? And what are some of the tips and tactics that you are giving your companies to make them aware of this candidate-driven market that we're in?
Yeah, I think what's happening is a lot of organizations aren't listening to their people,
Right.
because they're giving input, but for some reason, I think a lot of leaders coming out of the pandemic are kind of burnt out. So they're missing things that they didn't miss in the past.
Right.
If someone makes a comment and you're wondering about it, I think a lot of leaders now are blowing by that comment instead of saying, well, what do you mean by that? Or when somebody is, like when you do that Monday morning call and somebody's exceptionally quiet, who's normally very open and gregarious or whatever, and you don't get that, you've got to be an incredibly good listener and say, well, Angela, you're pretty quiet today. Is everything okay?
Mhm.
Ask those questions and then shut up and listen. And for some reason with Zoom, we do it less. We tend to talk over people because we're not there and we can't gauge the nuances and subtleties. So you really have to be very, very aware when you hear something. Is there a pause? You gotta listen to what maybe isn't said as much as is said, and then you've got to probe and be attuned to your people.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's a very true. And in some cases, it's not often been referred to as the Great Resignation, but the Great Reawakening, right? The Great Realignment on really what values have in place behind these employees through the onset of the pandemic. So other tidbit that I want to touch on, which you mentioned earlier on the statistics, in 5 years, we can expect, more than half of the workforce to have the average age of 37 years old. We
Right.
know that with millennials and Gen Zers, I mean, you mentioned it, they're willing to leave a job if they don't feel appreciated. They are
Right.
looking at things like a company's social stance on certain issues that they feel passionate about. Sometimes they value freedom and remote work settings over basic principles like health insurance. How do these trends transcend itself into the makeup of this population? Well, they're job hoppers, right? I think the average tenure is maybe 3 years for these guys, and myself included as a millennial. So, what do you think a company's realistic outlook should be when it comes to adequate retention?
I don't think our outlook should change. I
Okay.
think what's happened, and I tell this to clients of mine, people want to be loyal,
Yeah.
but companies have done things to kill employee loyalty. And
Wow.
so my clients, you talk about the great resignation. My clients haven't had the great resignation
Wow.
because they built people-centric cultures. They're attuned to their people. They've made adaptations to ensure that they're in touch with people. They listen. And so my clients, their people haven't left. Yeah, they've lost, a few people have left because they said, well, I absolutely want to do virtual. And most of my clients do either a hybrid, and they'll do a hybrid in the office, but they rarely do full virtual
Hmm.
because what they find is it kills your culture. You lose that disconnect, that engagement, all those things. So um, yeah, and it's really tough when you're in a split type of environment. Well, let's say it's construction or it's manufacturing, uh, and you've got a bunch of people that are working all virtual, and you got a bunch of people that are working in where they physically have to be there. It can create a resentment.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
can create that resentment. So you have to be prepared to address that, particularly if you've got a whole group of folks that are working in the organization. And you got to be willing, you got to willingly get up there and say, hey, look, the only reason, we would offer it to you, but your job is such that it doesn't allow for that.
Hmm.
And it's everything it's just every situation is so different. Um, is what I see, which makes this whole thing complex. But I don't believe that people want to be disloyal. I think people are actually craving the loyalty. They like to stick around because they're comfortable. If you give them challenging assignments, you do all those sorts of things. You help them grow. You communicate with them. You do, you're visible no matter what, in what way, shape, or form you're visible. Um, you're paying them fairly.
Hmm.
And a whole variety of things I actually talk about in my book, Give Your Employees Crap
Well,
and
and
some of
you
it.
touched on so many different parts of that equation, right? Invest into them, expand their skill set, make them feel like they're being
Yep.
challenged, and taking on new ventures. Invest into knowing their why. Everyone has a why, right?
Yep.
For me, it's my children. For you, it probably your boys. I mean, what is their why? And take the time to care about it, and then pay them fairly. I mean, things that are not
Yeah.
necessarily groundbreaking, but very fundamental to good retention strategies. And you really have provided a lot of insight to that. So thank you for that. I mean, for me as a leader within my company, I think that was a great refresher. And I know that a lot of people are going to find value into what you're saying as well. So treat your people with crap,
Right.
caring, respect, appreciation, and praise.
It's really the linchpin. If I talk about the fact that there are 7 other key elements,
Right?
but if you are not giving your people crap, no matter what you do as far as growth and all these other growth and communication and visibility, you won't keep people because
Hmm.
it's really it's if you had to put it as a hub, it's the hub on a wheel.
Hmm.
Uh, and the other things are important, but it's that hub that if you're not doing it, you're going to be in trouble. And it's also the heart of a culture. We
Right.
talked about that. It helps drive engagement, and then the other things also help do that, but they're not as integral.
Right. A big part of that I think is, and tell me what you think about this, but as a generation from the baby boomer, it's almost like this novel concept now to be a leader with empathy. Um, or maybe that always has been around, but I've seen a lot of things, a lot of publications talking about the empathetic leader, and it really is lending itself to this whole ideology that you have with crap.
Right. Yeah, I had the guy who actually taught me crap. He
Mhm.
had at one point, he a new general manager, he came on board and he had started exposing me. We became more visible and that sort of thing. Because he ultimately told me, he says, because I was concerned that you didn't have the empathy that you needed because
Wow.
you you're younger. And he said people tend to get more empathetic as they get older because they experience people's problems. Well, you have to, as a leader, be attuned to that. And even if, let's say, you're a millennial boss, okay, you need to be in touch with your people. Or if you've got millennial managers working for you, you need to make sure they understand that, look, you've got to have empathy. And the best way to have empathy is get to know people and their problems.
Yeah.
So you can try, I believe, because it worked on me, you can train for empathy. But
Mm.
oftentimes we see, oh, that's a distraction. Well, my philosophy is culture drives results. And and as a result, my clients believe that. And
Right.
so they're not experiencing the great resignation.
Right.
Um,
Right. That's interesting. So Jeff, how did you get into speaking? How did you find and develop one of your passions and start to get into speaking engagements all over the country? I guess I'm just curious on that point.
yeah, I had joined the National Speakers Association, our Wisconsin chapter, and because I thought speaking would be a good way to promote my search business.
Right.
And one thing led to another, and then one day one of my colleagues in NSA said, retention like you wouldn't believe. Why don't you start speaking on that? And I did. And I mean, when I first started, I did unpaid gigs. I spoke for mileage, and as I joke with people, that's probably about what I was worth at the time as far as my speaking abilities. And as I've gotten better and better and better. I'm speaking to larger audiences, um, doing more consulting, those types of things, because I frankly, I've grown as a speaker. And one of my big strengths, I say one of the advantages of being older is I've experienced a lot. And I relate when I have, every time I want to relate a point, I always tell a story.
Hmm.
And I've got some great stories, trust me. I mean, yeah, because of the environments I worked in and the things I'd done even before I'd gotten into HR. And
Right.
so my skill set grew, and and I love it because I feel like I'm making a difference.
Hmm.
You know, when when that light bulb goes on with audience members, I love that. That's great. And yeah, and I'll die on stage is my,
That's awesome.
I tell my wife.
Your passion truly shows that. So very cool. It's somewhat inspiring, I must say. So what is as we wrap up today's podcast session, although it makes me kind of sad because I feel like I could talk to you for hours about this stuff. What does your content diet consist of? I guess I'm just curious to know how you're staying up on the trends when it comes to talent and retention and projections in the future.
Well, I think that the first one I talk about is the fact I had this body of knowledge,
Mhm.
and I'm constantly researching. I'm listening to candidates that I am trying to recruit and seeing what the trends are. Myself and a young speaking colleague of mine, we've actually worked with an organization that's made up of it's I'll say it's kids in high school. They're all Gen Zs, and we've worked with them to help give some guidance to them. But they've been very upfront about, this is what I want, this is what's important to me. So we're keeping current by being around I'll say young people. Young people to me is probably anybody under the age of 40. I mean, and I joke about it, but I don't have a lot of friends that are my age. Crazy as that sounds, because all they talk about is retiring. And I like to I like to be around young people that are alive and vibrant. It helps me grow. Add on the research, and I mean, I'm a repository for information, because when I go to a client's doing something well, I'm able to take that knowledge and transfer it to my other clients as well. So you put all those factors together. That's how, I guess that's how I plan on remaining relevant for the next decade. How's that?
That's awesome. I've had the great privilege to sit down and interview many different people during this podcast. And one of the things that I think is the commonality between so many different interesting people is that curiosity to never stop learning, and just absorb yourself in whatever it is that your expertise lies in. Take that to the next level and constantly remain in absorbing the information. So it certainly resonates true. And I've had the wonderful chance of getting to know you. I know our listeners have as well. Thank you for letting us know some of the tips, your own path, your own strategy. If our listeners, we want to find out more information on this app that you're developing, or how to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Well, you could go to my website, jeffkortes.com, and there's a form. You just fill that out, or I tell people, pick up the phone, call me. I make this offer. I'm always amazed at how many people don't even do that. But you can give me a call at 414-421-9626. And again, that number 414-421-9626, or go to my website, jeffkortes.com. If they have questions about the app, or even needing workshop help, or you've got an association where you'd like me to speak, just reach out to me. And for what it's worth, hopefully in the next month, if you're really curious, you can go on workerpoll.com, and our website that's going to support the app is going to be up as well.
Awesome. Very interesting stuff. You guys also have to follow Jeff on LinkedIn. He posts, and I know this because this is actually how we got in touch for this podcast. A lot of great content that you guys can get whenever you connect with him on LinkedIn. So Jeff, thank you so much for sitting down with us. It's been wonderful. I hope that we have the opportunity to collaborate once again. But I really want to thank you, and I want to thank our listeners as well. I wrap up each podcast by thanking everyone for their time. I think time is one of the more valuable things that we can give to one another in this fast-paced informational age that we are in. So thank you guys for y'all's time, and we will see y'all on the next episode.
The one thing I would tell people, remember, give your employees crap, because crap works.
That's right. Caring, respect, appreciation, and praise. Love it. Thank you, Jeff. And thanks to our listeners.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Of course.